So I've seen this trend online lately, and the last few years I've noticed that it's been getting louder. And I wanted to share my thoughts on this growing idea that gift giving is toxic, materialistic. I've heard sentiments around it being childish and even something that adults should just grow out of.
You don't have to buy gifts for adults. They're grown. They have their own money, their own job. If they want a new blender, they can go buy it.
And honestly, I don't really agree. I wanted to share my 2 cents as somebody who's been on both extreme ends of the spectrum, as somebody who would buy excessively around Christmas time for others, whilst also buying excessively around Christmas time for me, to then going to the completely opposite end of the spectrum. Today I wanted to talk about why I'm actually defending gift giving. Not necessarily the mindless version that a lot of us have been sold and a lot of us now think of when we think of gift giving, but the real human version that's been connecting us for literally thousands of years. With my channel, I am trying to bring back a nice, healthy, balanced perspective to social media, because I feel like in a world in which the algorithm, and a lot of times, let's be honest, human behavior, prioritizes the clicks of, oh, your 2030 must-have items that you need to have. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's literally don't own anything, don't buy anything, everything is stupid. I wanted to provide this, what I deem to be a bit more of like a middle balanced place. And I fully recognize that this perspective I have may come from two places. One, I am not spending anywhere near as much time mindlessly scrolling on social media. I don't know if that's part of my perspective, or I don't know if this is just my Australian perspective, because stereotypically, like, I'm painting with a bit of a broad brush, but Australia isn't necessarily as, I mean, it's getting there now. I think the world is becoming more globalized, and just with the rise of the internet and online shopping. But I think Australia, stereotypically throughout the years and growing up for me, obviously it's not as, like, certain holidays aren't as commercialized. I mean, Black Friday's only really started to become a big thing here in Australia within the last, 10 years? I don't know. When I grew up as a kid, it wasn't really a thing. Halloween is only really something that started to kind of ramp up more here in this country. Either way, I think this whole view of gift giving, I think this narrative is kind of missing something quite huge. I'm quite a sucker for tradition, and I don't necessarily like to dismiss all traditions, which I think is part of the reason why I don't want to completely dismiss gift giving. Gift giving is older than money, okay? Older than religion, older than written language. Anthropologists have actually found evidence of gift exchanging in every human culture throughout history, which is just amazingly mind-blowing to me. You could look into the Polynesian cooler exchanges. You could look into indigenous ceremonial gifts. You could look into the ancient Roman Saturnalia, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. All of these are really quite ancient traditions, and none of these, which involved gift exchanges, were about stuff. They were about connection, they were about respect, they were about community building. And I think calling gift giving shallow, materialistic, or childish, I think it's somewhat of a modern internet take that's not necessarily reality for a lot of people. And of course, like, I feel the need to say, as I step on toes most likely, everybody is entitled to their own opinion. Everybody is allowed to feel the way they do about anything they want. And obviously people are allowed to opt out of gift giving, people are allowed to opt in to gift giving. But I think with this growing narrative and voice I've seen around this negative association with gift giving, I did want to share my 2 cents today. Okay, so coming at you late at night from my iPhone, but before we get further into the conversation today, I do just want to acknowledge something important. Financial hardship at the moment, especially around Christmas and in this economic climate, is very real, and it's very real for a lot of people. And not everybody is in the position to give or receive gifts right now. This video today isn't necessarily about that. I wanted to focus more specifically on the anti-gift giving sentiments that I have seen online. I think that's a separate cultural conversation that I personally wanted to explore, because I haven't really seen anybody explore it from this angle. But it doesn't at all take away from the very real financial hardship that a lot of people are facing right now. And I just wanted to acknowledge that is a huge contributing factor, and really one of the biggest reasons why people don't partake in gift giving or gift receiving. And I just really wanted to acknowledge that before we get further into the video. Throughout history, gift giving has been associated and has marked really kind of monumental life moments for people. Births, deaths, marriages, harvest cycles, new alliances, changes of seasons. Gift giving is literally a love language. Gifts acted as a way to communicate with other human beings long before writing existed. In a gift economy, the meaning mattered more than the object. So I'm not sure where you sit with this and what your opinion is on this, because the theory of the gift is somewhat of an old theory, so you may not necessarily feel that it fits in today's society, but it does really interest me. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Marcel Mauss, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but he is basically the founder of gift economy research. A lot of his theories around gift giving is quite interesting to me, but he believed that gift giving and gifts hold emotional, social, spiritual, and practical meaning all at once. One of his core ideas is that gifts create and maintain social bonds. So a gift isn't necessarily just an object, it's a symbol of a relationship. And according to his theory, it comes with 3 natural obligations. So number 1, the obligation to give. Giving initiates connection. It says, I see you and you matter. Number 2, the obligation to receive. So receiving is equally meaningful in this theory of gift giving. So refusing a gift in many cultures is equivalent to rejecting the person. And we even see this in today's society in many areas of life. Even if you may not want something to eat or want a piece of cake or want a drink, but if you go over someone's house and they offer you something, a lot of the time it feels like the polite and right thing to do to receive it and to accept it, which is interesting from a social standpoint. And number 3 is the obligation to reciprocate. So Marcel believed that it wasn't necessarily an obligation to reciprocate immediately or equally, but eventually. And this ongoing exchange builds trust, stability, and cooperation. This exists and has existed in society for thousands of years. Gifts maintained alliances. They prevented conflict, they built social status, and they reinforced belonging. And when you think about that, and when you think about those ideas throughout history, it is a very different narrative and basically completely the opposite of today's idea of gifts being clutter and gifts being a waste of money. I don't know if it's necessarily the popular narrative, but I do think it's a narrative that's growing. Communities around minimalism, overconsumption, budgeting, which are all things that I think are valid. So other than the anthropological, historical element of gift giving, there's actually quite a number of interesting studies and research that's come out about gift giving in neuroscience. So some research suggests that gift giving activates reward pathways in the brain. So we're talking dopamine, oxytocin, and these bonding circuits. UCLA actually found that experiential gifts create a deeper emotional closeness than material ones. This is something that I have found to be quite true for my own personal life. And in terms of material gifts, the Journal of Consumer Research showed that thoughtful, personalized gifts increase relationship satisfaction for both people. And I think there are a large number of us, maybe majority of the population, that are potentially wired for this. Which brings me to my next point, why the backlash? And I think the backlash is very much warranted, and I can see where it comes from. But I kind of got thinking about this. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. But I don't think that a lot of people necessarily dislike gifts. I think that they dislike what capitalism has turned gifting into. Because keep in mind, gifting has existed long before capitalism has been around. And in modern times, especially now, holidays have pretty much become about marketing events, sale periods, competitive consumption, very obligation heavy, and some would even say performative, especially now with what we can view on social media. And I think a lot of people aren't necessarily rejecting gift giving. They simply are rejecting overspending, clutter, the expectations, the pressure, the comparison trap that they find themselves in. And I think this is more a reaction to heavy consumerism, not necessarily to the human ritual of gift exchange. And as I mentioned before, for a lot of people, this is where their love language comes in. You know, people forget that gift giving can be a love language. Gift giving is still somewhat important to me, but it's not necessarily my primary love language anymore. When I took this love language test, like in my early 20s, and gift giving came up as like one of the highest love language. And I felt really like materialistic and shallow, and I felt bad. And I think there is a little bit of this correlation, and people have this misunderstanding that gift giving is ultimately tied to that. And it's not always the case. For many people, gifting and gift giving represents nostalgia. There's a sentimental reason behind it as well. It can be very symbolic. And it's very much a way of people feel seen and heard. And, that idea of like, oh, somebody thought of me. And also, the joy of surprising someone and simply just wanting to feel seen by someone. And these things don't necessarily disappear just because TikTok or social media decided that gifts are overconsumption or gifts are childish for adults. People who have a love language of gift giving are not necessarily materialistic. They value thoughtfulness. Gift giving is literally older than commerce, and reducing it to simply overconsumption or consumerism is, I personally think, a bit of a misunderstanding. And gifts can be obviously not always material, but they can be material. They could be something like handmade, a handmade note, a home cooked meal, an experience. I love to bake gifts as well. Even something thrifted or repurposed. Gifts can also be time, attention, someone's presence, something handmade, like I mentioned. And I think, especially around this time of year, holiday burnout comes from this overwhelming feeling of obligation. And I totally understand, I totally relate. I went through that a few years ago, where I just felt so burnt out and so over it. I think a lot of people who maybe say, I don't like gifts, aren't saying, I don't like connection. They're saying, like, I don't want random crap in my house. I don't want the pressure. And honestly, that's fair. But I don't really think that the answer is to simply abolish gifts altogether. I think it's to reframe it and to somewhat reclaim it. Gift giving, in my opinion, can be clutter-free. It can be sustainable. It can be intentional. And I think it can also be budget-friendly. And I really think more than anything, it can be emotionally meaningful. I understand that for a lot of people who especially are trying to get a hold of their spending or spend more sensibly and more intentionally, I think that you can still participate in gift giving in a budget-friendly way. A lot of people don't want random crap. They don't want clutter in their house. And if you're somebody who's really not good at faking things, like I can totally relate to, I don't know, like getting a present and just being like, oh, okay. Something I will never use or something that I don't know where to put in my house. Isn't that great?
A book, I love books. Microwave recipes for one. It's just very pragmatic. I need this because I keep on accidentally making microwave recipes for two. This is the perfect gift. Thank you so much.
Gifting from a place of intentionality, and also like truly considering that person and knowing that person, understanding that person. You can gift an experience, you can gift something that's consumable, you can gift something that's an upgrade to something that they already use. But I think for me, one of the biggest things is something kind of small but maybe deeply personal. I think there's this idea, especially now, that gifts have to be big, gifts have to be extravagant, gifts have to be like somewhat expensive to be meaningful, and that's not always the case. One of my favorite kind of gift to give is something really small but like deeply personal. I'm thinking of one person in particular in my real life, in which earlier on this year we shared a memory and we shared a joke with each other. We were delirious. We were laughing so hard. I was looking online the other day and this little thing popped up that reminded me of that particular joke. And I know that when they open that, they're going to be reminded of that joke, and we're going to be able to laugh about it all over again. And those kind of things, yes, to some people that may feel wasteful, that may feel silly. But for me, those things like strengthen bonds, and they reignite and they spark old memories, which I think just strengthen relationships and friendships. And I think for me, that's one of the most valuable things about gift giving, is the real meaningful aspect of it. I think there's also a real vulnerability piece of gifting and receiving gifts that no one talks about. I think to receive a gift, it really requires you to literally feel seen and accept somebody's love and feel worthy, and allow someone to know you enough to gift you something good. And I think sometimes in our real hyper independent culture, that's a lot of time where that maybe uncomfortable feeling comes from. For some people, it's easier to say, I don't like gifts, than to examine that discomfort underneath. And again, like, I'm not out here trying to psychoanalyze you. You may be someone who just genuinely doesn't like gifting. But I think in an increasingly isolated world, we're really losing a lot of these rituals that build community. You know, we're losing communal markers of time. We're losing ways to say, I care about you. Obviously, you know, you can say that with words. And sometimes, you know, that comes in a form of a text message. I think sometimes when you attach something else to those words, it can be just as powerful. So the idea of completely rejecting one of the few remaining rituals of like generosity and connection because some people give gifts feels a bit extreme. And again, like I completely get it. Some people genuinely just don't like gifting, and that's totally fine. But I think to completely dismiss it as, like I said, toxic, materialistic, overconsumption, aiming that gifting should just be for children, that kind of makes me sad. I think a lot of this comes from a place of one, overconsumption, but also potentially a place of just some people give bad gifts. I think part of the reason why we're losing it is because we're living in so much more of a fast-paced world, and we have everything at our fingertips. And, you know, around this time of year, I mean, I used to partake in these videos as well, but there are like 101 different gift guides for the man in your life, the woman in your life. But a lot of time, if you really think about it, these gift guides aren't personal. They're very broad. And a lot of the time, really like broad gifts, like, 40 gifts, like 40 must-have gifts for the woman in your life. I think gifting should be, and is a very personal thing. And I think a lot of the time maybe we've gotten a bit lazy with our gifting because we've got so much on our plates that we resort to these really generic or just these broad painted brush kind of gift ideas, which can sometimes work, yes, but a lot of the time you may just find yourself gifting something just for the sake of gifting it without actually really considering that person. I mean, there's also an argument I've seen online that gift giving is quite a selfish activity. Some people who genuinely don't want gifts and they don't like receiving gifts, giving something to them, like even though they've asked not to, is somewhat, in those people's opinion, quite a selfish act to do. I don't know where I land on that. Yeah, I think, sure. I mean, if somebody says they don't want a gift, but you buy them one anyway, you're probably doing it because you like to give gifts. And should you not? I mean, if someone says they don't want anything, I suppose maybe like don't do the whole gifting thing with them. But you can ask yourself, you know, how can I give in a way that aligns with my values and what I'm currently trying to do, whether that be budget, live more intentionally, spend less money, but also how can I give something the other person will genuinely appreciate? Like, what can I give them? I mean, for instance, God, I don't think she'll watch this actually. I have a friend who, you know, doesn't really like gifts. She doesn't want gifts, but she's an environmental scientist. So instead this year, I planted a tree in her name. And I thought that she might really appreciate that because she likes trees. But I think a great question to ask yourself is, how do I keep this ancient human ritual alive in a way that feels good for both me and the recipient? Because I think at the end of the day, a world without gifts isn't a world, or it may be a world with less consumption. But I also think it's a world with potentially less connection. And honestly, I don't think we can afford to lose any more of that than we already have. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you more into thoughtful gifting, or are you completely against gifts? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I hope that maybe if you're feeling really burnt out, or if you're feeling like super on autopilot, and a lot of those feelings are totally valid, especially at this time of year when we're rushing to get 1,000 things done. You know, this is like one of the busiest time of the year for a lot of people. I hope this video gave you something to reframe. I hope this video was something for you to think about. I'm at this point now where I actually enjoy the challenge, and I think I've always kind of been like that, because I do, gift giving is a way that I really express that I care about someone, and that I thought of them. I like to get quite creative with my gifts, and I like to really consider that person and what they like, who they are, and what I think they would like. I get a lot of joy out of that. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. I'm gonna have a few more links for you there if you wanna check those out. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.